Hello friends, this is Otz, and for a very long time I haven't really made any guide on how to run tiles or anything like that, but lots of people have been asking and I'm putting together this video to teach anyone that's getting into the game the very basics of the most common tiles that you see in multiple maps. Nothing super exhaustive or super in-depth, but hopefully enough to get you started. Let's get into it. And the first of our tiles is perhaps the most common one. There is a form of this one in basically every other map in the game, and it is the shack. The shack has a spot for totems, very often placed here. It can also spawn chests, typically here. And it has two lockers always in this configuration, more or less. It also has a very good chance, sometimes a 50-50, sometimes a 100% chance to have the basement with everything that implies. So it is comprised of one door, and this window. And in one of the doors, you'll have the pallet. And notice that the pallet is always on the same door, always close to the window. Overall, this is a really safe place to be. And the better the survivor, the longer and more they'll get out of it. Particularly strong when connected with other structures, which it typically is. And it plays out a little bit like this. As long as the pallet is not dropped, the killer has some chance to maybe get a hit, or perhaps against some slightly less perceptive survivors, even mind game. And we can show a little bit what that could look like. So here I see the killer chasing after me. I'm gonna lose sight of him. I don't see him. I think he's still behind me, but oh! Turns out I actually lost him and he got me there. Very good job. In this other scenario, I'm also being loosely chased. I lose sight of him for a second. I don't see him through the window. I think he's behind me, but he is not. Much of the gameplay of Shack revolves around waiting around this spot. And when you see the killer and you're convinced that they cannot fake it, take the window and then run this direction to get to the pallet. At some point, you will need to drop the pallet, and once you do, it's mostly a really good thing for you. No matter what this killer does, they are absolutely boxed in. I will make a lot of distance if they break it. If I do it from the other side, I will be a bit more boxed in myself, but I will also make a lot of distance, and it's really hard to play around this pallet being dropped. The nice thing is that you don't only need to play around this side. The moment the killer gets a little bit ambitious, you can always just run this way. And use that hole over there and this space right here to just sit right here and see where the killer is. Now, shacks are slightly different from map to map. They are very common, but they have different textures, different holes, so they don't all play exactly the same, but they are very similar. So sitting here, if I see the killer coming from one way, I can go here. If I see them coming from the other, I can come to this side. If the killer is inside and I am outside, it will also change. I can sit here and see them coming from both sides. Survivors can also run this way and see if the killer's going through the window or chasing from here. And the better the survivor, typically the harder the shack will play. Next up is the long wall jungle gym, which consists of a pallet and a window. But unlike the short wall jungle gym, where the pallet and the window are here and there, the window here is on this extremely long wall. Much like most other tiles, they are slightly different from realm to realm, but they almost all share this very long wall. And this wall with this window already by itself is very strong. You can pretty much play it by itself. If you vaulted and the killer's on the other side, you can just wait until they vault, or wait until they go one way, then go the other. And if you do it tightly enough, you can probably make this window already very difficult, especially if it is connected to other pallets, other windows, other structures, and so on. So seeing this window from afar as a killer, it's really scary. However, there are some things killers can do. If you're being chased by the killer, what the killer can do is like pretend to go sideways and then do a quick out of nowhere vault through the window, which will make it very likely that the survivor is caught in the middle in front of the window when this happens, and this can sometimes result in a hit. So this is something that you can add to your arsenal as a killer, and something to look out as a survivor. But of course, the jungle gym is not just this wall, there's a lot of other stuff. Mostly the pallet here, with a locker on this side, and typically another set of lockers right here. These are great lockers to use head on to save a teammate. And typically you can run this as well. The killer can try to do some mind games to get you, although if the survivor positions themselves well, it is very in favor of the survivor that they will be able to drop this pallet. It is a very, very safe pallet, and once dropped, the killer has so much space on either side that it's typically very, very difficult to get a hit once this pallet is dropped, unless some power is used or some insane 1 in a million mind game happens. Hits don't happen normally after this pallet is dropped, and that's why it's so strong. Use it when you need to, don't waste it lightly. Obviously, for the survivor, it's better to be chased in this direction that leads to the window, so it's very possible the killer will try to chase in the opposite direction so that you are forced to use a different route that doesn't lead into the window. That being said, you could still take the window or fake it and keep running to another tile or back to the pallet if it's still available. Overall, the jungle gyms with the long wall window are very, very strong, and they typically make the map a lot more survivor-sided if there are several of them. Right next after that is the short wall jungle gym. Notice that it's exactly the same structure except with two things swap. The window and the pallet that used to be in these two positions are now there and here. Now, this is not quite as easy to play, but it's still a very strong tile. The pallet, much like the other one, once dropped, is basically completely safe, unless some really crazy mind game happens or some killer power is in play. If you drop this, you will most likely force the killer to drop it, as they do not have a real chance to hit you around without you seeing them and getting away. The window is also really strong. You can fast bolt it from both angles if, you do it correctly, but for the most part, you want to be running at it from this angle. If the killer is chasing you from here, it is a bit of a 50-50. If you take it, the killer could be going back and hit you quickly, but it's also a 50-50 you can just ignore by immediately turning away towards the pallet or even running into some other place if it's available. As a killer, there are not a lot of mind games that you can do. Sometimes you can induce some mistakes, and you can play with the lack of vision and loose line of sight to get some nasty hits, but it is remarkably difficult, and the better survivors will typically avoid being in such situations anyway. Overall, it is a very strong part of the map, and one that you can learn to use really well. Here's an example of a mind game that you could try to pull off in this tile. And what it looks like from the other side. In this other example, the killer is on my heels. I'm gonna lose sight of him. I see his red stain and he goes right back. I'm gonna go, but he actually was faking it and he got me there. Next up is another classic that shows up in many maps, and it's the single pallet gym or C wall gym, because this wall here typically has a C shape. And it's a very simple gym, really. It has a set of lockers over here. You can spawn chests, as you can see. This little gap over here typically has a really common totem spawn. And the general idea is that as long as this pallet stays up, this is a slightly unsafe gym. There's no windows, as you'll see. And anywhere you go, the killer can potentially hit you straight up or mind game you when you lose sight of them, come the other way and get a hit. So this is a slightly risky place to be if the pallet is dropped. However, as soon as you drop this pallet, not only will you stop the killer in their tracks and potentially make a lot of distance, they also don't really have a lot of ways to play around them. Yes, this tile changes from map to map slightly, and there are some small differences, but for the most part, if you drop this pallet, most killers won't be able to really play around them effectively. There are some mind games that you could try that can actually work, but they do rely on the survivor making a bit of a mistake. It can totally happen though, so feel free to try that. Next up is a classic that shows up in many maps. They are very easy to identify because they have 1 and 2 windows and absolutely no pallets. They are the LT or TL walls. And they get their names because they are shaped like an L. And they're also shaped like a T right here. And overall, these are pretty fair tiles that give both sides a really good chance. There's also a bit of a leftover tile here with a locker, hook spawns, generator spawns right here very often. Totem spawns are very common right here. So these are very, very active parts of the map where you'll be running around a lot. Typically, the better the survivor and the more connected they are to other structures, the stronger they become and the other structures become. The general gist of it is actually really simple. As a survivor, you always want to run this in a clockwise manner. And if you do it like this, it is basically impossible for the killer to catch you. You can vault these windows many times before they block themselves. And yeah, like if the killer is chasing you in the same direction, you can do this pretty much indefinitely. Of course, the killer will not allow this, and instead, they'll push you the other way. And then it's not so simple, because if you vault from here, the killer could be on this side, but also on the other, and it's almost a 50-50. If you run this way, the moment you lose sight of the killer, you don't know if they're behind you or in front of you. So again, it's a bit of a 50-50. And when we go to the L part, it's a bit similar. I can see the killer, I don't see the killer anymore. So at this point, I am making a leap of faith that if I come here, he's not going to be here. And if I go back, he's not going to be here. Once I go around this corner, if I lose the killer behind the wall, then I also have a 50-50, because if I vaulted, I could get hit. But if I keep running and he appears right next to me, I could also get hit. So basically in this situation, you need to guess, and staying here for a long time, unless the killer is really clumsy, will mean that you'll eventually get hit. The real strength of the L2 walls is the fact that they make other structures, even weak structures, very strong. So if I'm running a killer here in a really weak place, if I get a little break, I can just connect back to the L2 walls, and now I'm in a very safe spot. So that's what makes these structures so strong, sometimes depending on the RNG of the map. Here's another example where, let's say the killer's right behind me, and I don't think I'm going to make it all the way around. Doesn't matter. I've got an L2 wall. And now if the killer comes around, then I will go all the way back to this window, or to this pallet, or fake it and go back to the TL walls. That's basically what makes them strong. Not how strong they are by themselves, but how well you can connect them with everything else in the map. A very cheeky mind game that gets me very good results in TL walls involves waiting around this corner like this. And the reason this trick works is because if the survivor keeps running and doesn't see you behind them, they might think that you actually switch sides and that now you're coming from the middle. In that moment of hesitation and repositioning, you can catch them off guard. Ranged killers are very strong if survivors run the TL walls conventionally, but typically what they'll try to do is actually just hog the walls around them and not vault windows in front of your face, making it much harder for you to catch up. Next up, the legendary tile, the Z wall. It has a shape of a Z or Z and a window in the middle. The survivor can try to vault this window in some creative ways. The killer chasing you around it, you can try to fake it, maybe the killer will miss an attack. But the truth is, this is not a good tile. It's a bit of a meme. You never want to start a chase here because you will get hit immediately. Instead, what you want to do is, if you have absolutely no options and you're by the edge of a map, the edges of the map is where this typically spawns. So if you're completely out of options and you find one of these, you can take the window to avoid a chainsaw, you can take the window to delay the killer a little bit, then you can go around and maybe fake it and run somewhere else, or pretend to take the window and then keep running, and you can do some little maneuvers to hopefully buy you a little bit of time. That's the real utility. You can also use it to proc life and other vault-related perks. And of course, if you are lucky enough to have it close to another tile, then you could use it to maybe pull off some kind of mind game against a one-shot killer and lose them and get somewhere safer. Some maps also have a variation of the Z wall, which is kind of like a U wall, and it's basically the same idea. Yeah, you could get a nasty vault out of this window into another window, or you could use it to avoid a chainsaw, but for the most part, you will use this as a last resort in the final stages of a chase, just to lengthen it a little bit more. Next up are a bunch of tiles that are loosely similar, called the straight tiles. And we call them straight tiles because that's their name in the game. They are one long wall of obstacles, one small pile of obstacles, and in between them, a pallet. Now, if you're already in a good spot, this is typically a very strong tile against most killers. If you are playing in the farm version of this is actually much taller, and even ranged killers cannot really get you here. In the normal Macmillan version of this, you actually will be able to be targeted by ranged killers, so watch out for that. So this is a very, very strong tile for survivors if they get to it comfortably. Typically, if a killer tries to get you, eventually they'll close the gap. You just need to drop the pallet, and they literally cannot go around it unless they are really, really bloodlusted. So once you drop the pallet, this is incredibly safe against the average killer, and they'll need to break it. Particularly strong if you can loop around it and then connect it to some other window or some other tile. So these tiles can be really, really nasty if you can loop them and then take another window. However, the really interesting part about these tiles is that depending on the angle where you approach them, the killer actually has a bit of a 50-50. If you guess correctly, then you'll be able to run the tile normally, and the killer will be in trouble. But if the killer guesses correctly, you might get hit at the start, and that would be a waste of a good pallet. So be careful in these scenarios. You need to be unpredictable and maybe even just not even drop the pallet and keep running in some situations. Use your best judgment. It is a bit of a 50-50 sometimes. Following up is the Trash Pile Gym, or Trash Gym, or Pile Gym. This appears in Ormond, this appears in Mother's Dwelling and Temple, and it can also appear in Yamaoka. And the trend of these tiles is that there's always a pile of wood, or a pile of trash, or a pile of ski equipment right in the middle that makes them very distinct. It is very simple. It has a fairly strong pallet, the aforementioned piles, and then a really good window that you can pretty much play by itself. Most of the times these walls are very solid and very long, so you vaulting this is a lot of distance, especially if you're coming from elsewhere and make it to this window. It is extremely safe. These pallets, these jungle gyms have a good tendency to spawn with this window facing other strong parts of the map. So anytime you vault this window, you are safe. For the most part, killer cannot really do many mind games here, so you can just play this window by itself, and it's already decently strong. But of course, it is stronger if you mix and match it and always run out of line of sight and get to the pallet. Running out of line of sight with these little trash piles is super strong against ranged killers, so that can help a lot. You don't have the line of sights that you do in other gyms. And then eventually you'll get to the pallet, and once you drop the pallet, especially in the Ormond one where there's a big hole right here, the survivor sees the killer almost perfectly. There's almost no mind games you can do. So this pallet once dropped becomes very safe, especially with the window being there. However, depending on the angle and depending on whether or not you want to drop the pallet, this could become slightly unsafe. If the killer is on this side, or if you find yourself on this side with the killer on the other, there are some situations where the killer might be able to guess which side you're going and might beat you to the pallet. So in this situation, I'm going to refuse to drop the pallet, and I actually don't see where the killer is, and unfortunately, I will get hit before I reach it. So that was a big waste. Next up is another structure that we also only find in Red Forest, in Yamaoka, and in Ormond. And it's the Locker Gym, or Many Locker Gym, or Multiple Locker Gym, or whatever you want to call it. The defining feature of this that makes it recognizable is that there are like 5 lockers, and it's really, really messy for the killer if there are multiple survivors with head-on. It also has a very common totem spawn right here. And this is only one of the halves. The other half is actually the stronger part. It always has a pallet right here and has this window right here. Overall, much like many other places, if you stay right here trying to guess where the killer's coming from, you could get hit, but the moment you drop this pallet, this becomes really safe. If the killer goes the other way, you can literally just wait here, and when you see them, you can vault and you'll be safe. If the killer tries to go anywhere else, you can also just take this window and just keep running. And no matter what happens, if the killer vaults, you just go back. If they don't vault, you keep going and take the pallet again. No matter what the killer does here, unless you are caught in some really terrible angle, you will almost always be able to avoid them, and they will almost always need to break that pallet no matter what. This window can also be really, really, really handy if you're working on something and it is your only way of safety. So if you're working, let's say, on a generator in an area like this and you connect to this window, it's also a really great way, because once you vault it, you can literally wait right here and see where the killer goes and just come to some angle where you have good vision on both sides. And no matter where the killer goes, you will almost always beat them back to the window or to the pallet, especially if you use that hard and stuff like that. So overall, these tiles are extremely nasty, and as a killer, you need to be quite afraid of them. The way to run them as a killer is to try to deny them the pallet drop, ideally, if possible. Some mind games might be possible, but it's really risky because the visibility on these is typically very, very, very good. There's also, obviously, the chance that they could just run through the back and wait in a place like this where they can see you or hear you, and then just run you all around and then connect it with other stronger loops even. So be very careful with these. Next up is the 4-lane wall. And there's 2 variations, but they all are very easy to identify because there's 1 lane of wall, another wall right here, another wall right here, and another wall right here. And there is always 1 pallet on this side and the window on the other. It's very important to remember that the pallet is on one side and the window is on the other half. If you see the window from this side, don't come searching for the pallet here because it means it's on the other side. And if you see the pallet on this side, don't expect the window anywhere here because it's actually on that side. This is the weaker of the 2 variations because the longer wall is not on the pallet side. So if I drop this pallet right here, I box myself in, and it's actually very difficult to get out. If the killer comes from this side, I can get hit very, very easily. The best thing I can do is try to drop this early, and before the killer catches me, try to immediately go this way and get the fastball. And once I get this fastball, I am mostly safe, and I can either loop away into some other tile or even back to the pallet if that's all I have. But again, depending on the killer, this can be complicated. And then we have the second variation. Again, there are hooks, generators, totems that can spawn right here. So this is a high activity. In this other variation, this pallet is arguably worse because once you drop it, there is a very short wall on this side that the killer can easily mind game you at and hit you. The best chance sometimes, if you want to play this by itself, this pallet by itself, is if the killer is behind you, just keep running. Just keep running, and once you reach the end, wait to see which side they come from and connect with something else or go to the window. Now, the window here is actually a little bit further and harder to reach, but the strength of this window comes from the fact that it actually connects outside. So even though in this one example, this window literally leads to absolutely nothing, there will be many situations where these 4-lane walls have this window right next to a generator or right next to shack or right next to another strong one. And then they become really strong because you can always rely on this window to come back, dodge the killer, see where they're coming from, and at the end of the day, come to this pallet. Now the killer is really on top of you. You can drop it, try to stun them. If you feel confident, you can also just keep running and make sure that you don't get mind gamed, and eventually make it back to the window, make it back to the pallet, make it back to whatever other structure you can find to last a little bit longer. And just like that, these 4-lane walls, while not the strongest, can actually delay the killer quite a bit if played correctly and if the RNG allows it. Next up is the elusive Labyrinth Gym. These gyms are only found, I think, in Yamaoka as well as Ormond, and they are very labyrinthic. If you run around them, you'll see that the many protruding walls make it look like there's actually a lot of paths where there's actually not that many. These gyms have 2 variations where you will have a pallet and a window. This is the one where the pallet and the window are actually fairly well connected and they're a little bit easier to use. And the other one can spawn the pallet, I believe, slightly further and the window slightly differently, and they do not connect as seamlessly, but they are still okay. Now the pallet, by virtue of being a pallet, is pretty damn good. If you get caught in a bad spot, you can always drop it. The walls around them are actually a bit claustrophobic, and it's hard for you, let's say once you drop it and you lose the killer, let's say behind this wall, if you go here, you literally have no clue what's going on. So the best thing you can do around this tile, if you have your distance, you can stay out on the outsides and try to figure out where the killer is to get good use out of the window. And otherwise, you can just rely on the pallet. Obviously, if the killer doesn't break the pallet, you can always just sit right here, see which way they're coming, and pretend to use the pallet and then keep running. And don't try to do a 50-50 like this, because that's the only way you could honestly get hit if the killer hides behind one of these walls. If you just keep running and don't get too lost in these, I think you will be mostly fine. They are okay tiles, they are confusing for both sides, And one of the distinguishing features of this jungle gym that makes it very unique is that it has no lockers whatsoever. So if you have head on or inner strength, inner healing, whatever perk to heal in a locker or use a locker or reload in a locker or certain killers, you will not find that here. So don't keep looking. There are none. That's one of the things that can make you identify this tile immediately. That and the very many strange angles and protruding walls that make it so characteristic. Okay, so up next is a variant gym, very similar to the Long Wall Jungle Gym. This one only appears in Yamaoka and the Crow of the Area of Crows. Also used to be in Ormond, and it's fairly simple. It is very recognizable because it has these angled set of lockers. And much like the Long Wall Gym, has a long wall window and a pallet. Now, the pallet itself is a bit interesting. You could just play around this pallet, but then you lose line of sight. So it is a bit risky. Luckily, the window does provide an alternative, and this window has a fairly long wall around it, almost enough to play it by itself. Almost. Unfortunately, the window removes line of sight enough to that if you guess wrong, the killer could win a 50-50 and get you. So these two you'll try to play together. Notice that if I am here, I am very, I don't have any information. So sometimes you'll just want to drop this pallet. It is possible to try to play with the pallet drop just vaulting back and forth. It is strong enough to attempt this. Although I feel that one smart play from the killer and you could be in trouble. So typically your best idea will be to drop it and immediately move to an area where you can see your left as well as maybe your right and be able to make the best decision on whether or not you want to play for the window. Just because these windows and pallets are accessible from the outside, this is already a pretty strong tile. Just the fact that you can come from the outside or chain this with other stuff. One thing I should mention is that this tile had a different variation back when it was introduced in Ormond, where the window and the pallet appeared in different places. Although I think this one is now unused. So unless they introduce it back, I don't think we'll be seeing that. Next up is the Broken Truck. The Broken Truck always spawns in Gas Heaven and has a really good chance to also spawn in many of the other Auto Heaven maps. And it's honestly not very strong. Survivors will typically only run here as a last resort or to avoid some lethal attack. There's a car here, some totem spawns that you can care about, and for the most part, it's all about this window. Survivors come here, they try to fake it, then maybe they take it, and eventually the killer just walks around and hits you. As a killer, especially if you're ranged, you can come to this point right here, prepare an attack, and if they evolve, just walk a little bit to the side and release it. And this works for many ranged killers, and it's pretty damn good. So all in all, one of the best things you can do around this structure is just stay on one of the sides and use it as a wall. And if the killer comes from one side, use it to go to the other, and then either go through it or around it to make it someone else. So that's the best thing you can do with it. Next up is the crane, which you'll find in most Auto Haven maps, and a variation of it can also be found in Ormond next to the main building. There is a decently strong pallet, with one side being pretty damn good, with great visibility over it, allowing you to see the killer and making it really safe against certain killers before you drop it. And then the other side being absolutely humongous. If we go through the back, we can check that up there can be a chest. Down here, there can be some totems. And if we move our camera down a little bit, we can actually see right through it if we keep it at this angle. Not like this, but like this. So this cannot be mind gamed by the killer pretty much at all. So as long as I stay like this, I will see the killer behind it. And I can go around it and around it and around it until the killer catches up, and then I can drop the pallet. Alternatively, I can also come up here to trigger a balanced landing, or go through this window. I could also try to be cheeky and hide here if the killer's going to use a projectile, or I could just come here and wait, or I could come right here and just wait here where I see the killer. And then when I see that they're coming, I drop. If I drop too early, it's possible the killer will just keep going. And as soon as I drop, and with a bit of a stagger, I will be caught before I make it around. So don't drop through here carelessly, because you could get caught. It is a great idea, however, to drop if you know that this connects with some other strong tile around here. So overall, what you can do as a survivor is very simple. Take the chase in this direction. Check for this. Go up if it feels like it will give you an advantage. If the killer is too close and you cannot do another lap, then you begin to loop this way. Maybe change direction if you see the killer. Eventually, you give it up, you drop it. The killer most certainly has to break it unless they have some power that allows you to be caught with the power. Most regular killers cannot really play around this, and it is a pretty damn strong tile with no variation whatsoever. Next up, we have another Autohaven exclusive that has a really good chance to spawn on 4 of the 5 Autohaven maps, and it is the bus. It also has 2 variations. In one of them, the pallet is here, and in the other, the pallet is right here. This is the stronger one. Now, this pallet arguably boxes you in a little bit and is a little bit claustrophobic, so it doesn't feel as nice to use. And it is a little bit easier for the killer to deal with, but it's still fairly strong. And once you drop it, if the killer is on the other side, you can keep running and reliably make it to this very strong window. Now, this window has a little hole here that some killers can use to hit you through it, range killers mostly. But for the most part, this window is just tremendously strong. You vault it, you put a lot of distance between you and the killer. If the killer follows you, you just need to go around. You will see them through many, many holes and other points that offer line of sight. So basically, no matter where you run, as long as you wait around the corner properly and you check properly, you will see the killer. And then you will vault the window. And wait, no, you shouldn't take it this way. You go this back. And you can just keep vaulting this window. And for some average killers, it can actually be super hard. The fact that you can be doing a generator, for example, here, and then at the first sign of trouble, immediately run to this window is a huge, huge pain for killers. And as you can see, it's just very easy to run it and maybe even connect it with other things in the map. So this window is genuinely really, really, really strong. And as a killer, you don't have a lot of counterplay. Yes, you can try to induce a vault to the window and then catch up the other way, but depending on your power or lack of power, you don't want to spend a lot of time here. And then we have the second variation of the bus, where this pallet is moved from there to here. And the window that typically sits right in the middle is now moved to the back of the bus. Arguably, this pallet is more accessible, gives you a better view around it, and is actually arguably stronger. Because once you drop it, you don't get boxed in, you actually see perfectly. And if you drop it from this side, you just keep running. And if you drop it from the other and the killer's on the other side, you could even go for the window or go right here. This window is a bit of a death trap. If the killer's right on top of you and you're not vaulting it, you will get hit. And if the killer's right on top of you and you vault it, they're just going to take a slight turn through here and they'll come around and they'll catch you. So the idea with this window is to take it decidedly and not wait here or anything, because this is just a 50-50 that you're likely to lose. So if you understand that this window is a little bit weaker, but that the pallet is still very good, this is really nice. You cannot vault that window from that side, I'm sure you've noticed. So obviously you cannot vault and then vault back, and you cannot come from afar and then take this window. But depending on the angle, the fact that this pallet is a little bit easier to use and that you can just go around in circles and make some slower killers have a hard time catching up is still pretty damn good. So overall, even though this boss is weaker, it's still a decent place to run. And it's typically around edges of the map sometimes, so you can use it as a really good defense when you're trying to open the gates, for example. This next one shows up in almost every farm map and has a good chance of spawning totems on its back as well as on top of it. It's called the Harvester or Combine, depending how you want to call it. And it's a very simple structure. There's not much to do around it. What you want to do is go to the front, climb up, and make sure you don't try to vault this. This is a dead end. This will get you killed. Instead, you want to take either the right window or the left window. If you slow or medium vault the left window, you will be up here, but killers can hit you. It's a good way to delay the killer and make it difficult for them to pick you up if you really, really are desperate for that. But as far as I understand, this should not keep you safe forever. Obviously, the killer can also come and pick you up from there. If you do a fastball on this side, however, you will most likely fall off. And then if the killer predicts that well enough, they'll catch you quickly. Likewise, the killer can also catch you if you go to the right by dropping into this little hay and eventually catching up. But what you can always do is vault and then vault back if you expect it, and that can make it difficult. Or even just pretend to vault. You can come here, pretend to vault, wait for the killer to come, and then vault the other way, or even just drop and use your balance landing, etc. It is an excellent spot for balance landing in general, and against killers that have a chainsaw or a power that is really threatening, this can definitely help to delay them. Otherwise, though, it's not a place where you can run the killer forever, because when you drop from one of these, you do get a stagger, and that will make the act of catching up for the killer a little bit easier. Very well, next up on our farm list is the cow tree. It's a tree with cows, and that's why it's named the cow tree. Fun fact, you can actually move the animal carcasses if you hit them with a projectile. This is a pretty simple tile that's actually rather strong and is typically connected to other things in the map, which make it even stronger. So the general gist of it is there's a pallet right here, and that you can just run around this side, and when the killer catches up, you could just drop it. And once you drop it, considering the big visible obstacles on both sides, you will just never be able to catch the survivor ever. However, an even better idea for the survivor is to be chased in a clockwise manner so that they get a fastball on this window. And then if the killer has to go around it, it's even worse for the killer. Don't forget, the survivor can pretty much see you at any given point. So if you are being chased in this direction, the killer could try to hide behind the tree and then trick you to vault and then catch you. This can happen. So some survivors will typically just not even take that 50-50 and just step over here and just keep running. When the killer has come close enough and it's not possible to do another full lap over the big side, you can just run on the small side. And this is also safe enough that most killers, without using their power, cannot really hit you before you come and drop it. Once you do drop it, the killer will typically have to break it, because playing around it, it's just really, really painful. And again, don't forget, you can always use it to connect to other things. So yeah, overall a really, really strong part of the map, and because it's so visible from afar, it's typically easy to see it and know if it's a good idea to run towards it or not. Next up, a survivor favorite, the so-called House of Pain. And it's called the House of Pain because it's a real pain to deal with as a killer. You will find this guaranteed in Haddonfield, the current Haddonfield anyway, and the reworked Badham maps in all of them. In one way or another, you will have this house in those maps. The defining features of this house is that there are two entrances on the front. It has a basement with several rooms, and also two entrances from the back. The right one and the left one. And they do look slightly different. The one in Badham is more elevated and it's easier to run around it, has more fences. But the one in Haddonfield has more holes and better windows that make it even better for survivors. Now, very, very simple. Depending on how this house connects to the rest of the map, this window already is very strong. Very strong. Played correctly, this window alone can make it difficult for a normal killer to even get a hit, and not to mention it connects to the rest of the house. So coming into the house or coming out of the house, anytime you use this window, this will be already rather troublesome. Here we have a bit of a circle that we can run around. In the Badham one, this is more of a straight path that doesn't have the ability to loop into itself. But this window, often very strong. You can use it to get into it. And typically, you can also find other windows here. So these two windows already very strong against many killers. If you just run them like this, and the killer's behind you, you can just this is already a loop by itself. And it's already strong enough. And mind you, we haven't really gotten into the really strong part of the house yet. Sometimes a window can spawn there. This time we have it here. This will not trigger balanced landing sometimes, but depending on the vault, you can make it trigger it. Either way, you can take this or this path to come down here. You will always find a generator in this room. It will be either here. Badham can also spawn it there. A totem spawn can sometimes be here. More totem spawns with a bunch of lockers appear here often, so don't be shy to check here. Many lockers here make it easy to hide if you really need to, and a generator can also spawn right here. Now, this room here is the least of your concerns. If you are here, you're in trouble, you're going to get hit. You don't see the killer, you don't know where they're coming, they could be coming left, right? So if you're here, you're typically not safe. The safe part of this house, however, is this other side, and the way it loops. You will have a pallet here, or here, and it's basically a 50-50. This is just really strong. This pallet, unless some insane killer power is at play, and there's not many, you cannot play around that simply. The survivor can also just sit right here without using the pallet. Obviously, they could run you in circles and around the house and then drop this pallet when they need to, but before they even do that, they can sit right here. And in the Haunfield one, they can see through the staircase. In the Batham, they cannot, and just wait here. They come see you from, they see you from the left side. All they need to do is just do this, keep an eye on you, keep an eye on you, all right. And then look back or go elsewhere. Very, very strong. And let's say instead that they see you coming from the right side. Oh, well, very simple. They can just come here and take this window, or come back, make sure that they're not being mind game, and repeat. Let's say that they see you from the left again. Well, they can always, instead of taking this, just go here and repeat. And you start to get an idea of how disgusting this house can be. So yeah, House of Pain for the killer, House of Fun for the survivors. That's pretty much all there is to say. These windows have a bit of variability to them. And depending on the angle you approach, if a killer's right on top of you, you could ball this window and the killer could walk right around them. Same goes for this front door. So if the killer's right on top of you, it's possible that you won't be able to do much. But with a bit of a head start, these are just really, really strong paths to take that mostly give the killer very little counterplay if you know where to wait and where to stare and what to do and where to go. And with that, we conclude our little examination of all of the most common tiles in the game. There are many of them that are so common or so simple that I neglected to mention. Some of them that are specific to certain maps. Maybe we'll cover those in a future video. I'll see you there, or not. Have a lovely day.